What's the most you ever lost on a coin toss?
Sir?
The most you ever lost on a coin toss?
I don't know. I couldn't say.
Call it.
Call it.
Yes.
For what?
Just call it.
Well, we need to know what we're calling it for here.
You need to call it. I can't call it for you. It wouldn't be fair.
I didn't put nothing up.
Yes, you did. You've been putting it up your whole life. You just didn't know it. You know what date is on this coin?
No.
1958. It's been traveling 22 years to get here. And now it's here. And it's either heads or tails. And you have to say, call it.
Well, look, I need to know what I stand to win.
Everything.
How's that?
You stand to win everything, call it.
All right. Heads then.
Well done. Don't put it in your pocket,
Sir?
Don't put it in your pocket. It's your lucky quarter.
Where do you want me to put it?
Anywhere not in your pocket. Or it will get mixed in with the others and become just a coin. Which it is.
You are tuned in to God's Property Radio. Here are your hosts, Sam and Dan.
I go by Sam, and welcome back to God's Property Radio. This is Coin Toss. I think this is number 23, if I'm not mistaken. It might be 22. Man, I can't remember anymore. We've done so many of these things. But anyway, if you haven't been following the Kent Hovind trial and story and all that, I would suggest you go to freekent.com, go start from the beginning, work your way up if you're really interested. But to those who have been loyal listeners, we just want to thank you, first off, especially Wichita, Kansas. You people are downloading like crazy, and I just I feel like if we're gonna ever have a conference or something that we're a part of, we got to go to Wichita or somewhere near there, because there's a lot of you out there, and I just want to give you guys all some shout outs right now. There definitely are some other places that are downloading, but I've noticed you guys are our biggest listenership audience at this point. So thanks for downloading all these coin tosses and all of our normal episodes. And so, yeah, we all know that Kent Hovind is at home currently, and it has just warmed my heart and brought a smile to my face to see him get to eat pizza and go to Dairy Queen and be with his family and meet some of his grandchildren for the first time ever. So that has just been just a delight. And I know Dan feels the same way. At this point in the Coin Toss series, we're talking to Kent. We're definitely going to get him back on, but we're going to try to do a normal episode with Kent. Maybe we'll do a phone conversation to maybe cap things off, where he's at right now. But we definitely want to do a Kent Hovind normal GPR episode at some point. So, stay tuned for that in the future. Probably not for a couple more months. But anyway, Mr. Paul J. Hansen is still behind bars, and what I don't really get about this, and maybe I should have somebody explain it to me, maybe I should get it on air, but what I don't get is if they let Kent out of jail and dropped all of his charges, and Paul Hansen was, packaged in with that for the conspiracy thing, I don't understand how Paul Hansen would still be in the process of being sentenced for contempt of court charges that have to do with something that Kent Hovind was involved with him on in the first place. So I really don't understand how he can be locked up or do any time. Somebody's going to have to basically explain that to me in the coming broadcast, because we're definitely not done talking about this trial or the situation. We are now going for Hansification, and we're going to try to be talking to Paul as much as we can here, and some other people to shed some more light on some things. But in the meantime, we figured since we didn't have anything new for a while, God really brought Dan and I into this situation last summer when we talked with Paul Hansen and we broadcast our 8th episode with him called Placing the Burden of Proof. And we're going to rebroadcast that in this episode. So if you've heard that episode before, you can just turn this off and just go back and listen to the 8th episode if you ever want to listen to it again. But I just feel compelled that we should definitely raise awareness and attention, and we should all be banding together praying for Paul Hansen's release. And in other news, as we go forward with this, I know that Kent Hovind is going to be on some really awesome shows in the future here. And not to mention, yours truly and Dan will be probably with him on something, and that's about all I can say at this point. But when that happens, it'll be very exciting and very fun to do that. Yeah. So I guess I'll just hit you guys up on the outro and talk about a few other things. But for now, if you don't understand the whole legal situation with the Social Security number and the birth certificate and legal slavery, essentially, I suggest you listen to this rebroadcast of Episode 8, Placing the Burden of Proof with Paul J. Hansen.
Here we go.
All right. Well, hey, this is Dan. Thank you for doing this with us tonight, Paul. Sorry about the last time we tried to do this. I was having a bit of an unexpected health issue, and Sam was having some other technical difficulties. So sorry we kind of left you hanging.
Oh, that's no problem. It worked out fine.
Well, we just wanted to say we're really excited to talk to you about what you do. And I guess if it's okay, if you wanted to just get started, we'd love to get your testimony.
Okay, I'll just start off with my name and a few other details about my life. I'm 55 years old. I'm single, and I live in most of my life in Omaha, Nebraska, in that vicinity. I've basically been in pretty good pursuit of understanding the law for 15 years. I found that it's been very difficult. The biggest value that I've had in law is, or desire to learn the law, is basically my Christian faith, so that I can learn the truth. And of course, the truth will set you free in a lot of ways. My Christian testimony would be when I was a sophomore in high school. I remember a time when I was just practicing swearing. Had no desire for really any close relationship with God or anything like that. In a very short time, I went and just picked up a Bible and started reading it. Now, this is at a time in my life when I didn't read nothing. I was a hard worker on a farm, and I just enjoyed working, and I didn't read nothing. But I picked up the Bible one day, and I read a little bit of it real casually, and I was kind of interested in it a little bit. I thought about it during the day, and I come back and picked it up a little bit more and read a little bit more, and then I just, all of a sudden, I just found myself hooked on reading it, and I read through the Gospel of John and Proverbs, and I remember talking to people about how this book is fascinating. And all of a sudden, one night, I was laying on my bed, and I didn't have anybody really telling me the issues of born again or salvation or lost. I was always basically told that I was a Christian because I was baptized as an infant,
right,
in a Lutheran church, and that didn't really have any impact on me. But one night I was laying in my room after reading the Bible for 3 months, and I just remember laying the Bible down on the side of me, and I just laid there, and I said, in my heart, I don't know if I said it orally out loud, or I definitely in my heart said, Lord, I believe. And I felt this touch on my chest, and I just was like shocked. It's just a deep spiritual touch. And I believe it was the Lord just confirming that since I was all alone and didn't have any Christian fellowship or anything like that, that he was just confirming that I was in the right direction. And I went to bed that night. I never slept on my back. And I laid that night on my back the whole night. And usually when I woke up, the blankets were all tossed all over the place. And I remember waking up the next day and the blankets were laid on me exactly the same way as I went to bed at night. And I opened my eyes, and I remember looking around, and I go, what is different? I even got out of the bed, and I went over and touched the wall because things just seemed brighter.
Huh.
And I never told anybody about that for like 8 years. 8 years, I think. And then I finally started meeting people that had understood the scriptures and that the power of God moving in them, and I'm not a charismatic person per se, but I definitely hold fast to dividing the word properly, and really appreciate people that dive into the scriptures and see the truth and application of it and so forth. But my life, that moment, I felt that presence of the Lord just touching me and confirming me. I completely quit swearing the next day, and
wow,
awesome.
And I was a different person. I looked at everything differently from that point on. And of course, the more fellowship I got in, the more better Christian life I had. Of course, that goes in with obedience also. But that's my testimony. So I'm pretty much a Calvinist. I believe that I never woke up one time in my life and just the goodness of my heart broke out and cried out for God. I believe God reached down,
right,
miraculously began to change my heart from its wickedness to tenderness, and he circumcised my heart in a sense and gave it a softness to respond to him. The salvation that I received is completely of the Lord and not of my works.
Amen to that.
Yeah, amen. Praise God. So I guess what led you into, I guess, how do we start this off? Like, what is it exactly that you do with, in regards to the law and your understanding of the law? And then, how did you get into that? Were you always into that prior to being a Christian, or having that experience that you just told us about?
Ever since I was young, I've always asked why. So I would have several businesses when I was probably 20 years old. I started doing business, and the government would tell me to withhold wages from my salary, like my employees and so forth. And like workman's compensation, I remember the Nebraska government coming to me and telling me to withhold workman's comp, and I said, why? And all of a sudden I realized that they couldn't come up with an answer. And then after deeper studying, I found out that didn't have to be held until I had 8 employees, at least in their written law. Now, that's not even true to that extent, but I learned at that moment that those guys will lie to you. So I was very skeptical of every time the government told me something. I would start diving into, is this true what they're telling me? Basically, I started on the farm. I had like 5,000 hogs, and I got up to 1,000 cattle, and then I lost a large amount of money, and then I moved to Omaha, and I got up to 28 homes in Omaha, apartments, and the government started attacking me, and that's when I really started studying the law. I couldn't quite understand how they could throw me in jail for up to 2 years. They threw me in jail more than 2 years in jail for simple little housing code violations. They'd sting me here and there.
Really?
Wow.
I mean, I spent time in jail for fixing a window, a 1 foot by 1 foot window. They'd throw me in jail for it, for not getting a permit. And
wow.
It just got crazy. And I found out later the reason they kept stinging me is because I would keep asking why. And they didn't like that. I was enemy number one when I started doing that. Then I said, well, if you don't answer why, I'm not going to come in and get your permit. So essentially, after they threw me in jail many times, and it added up to over 2 years, and some of the jail time was associated with driving without a license so much, but most of it was housing codes. For example, one time I was just in the courthouse, and they came up to write me a ticket for a housing code, and I said, I'm in court. And the cop says, I'll get you later. So I'm done with my court hearing. Me and my friend walk out of the courtroom. This is five hours after he talked to us the first time. And there was nobody around. We just walked out, and that cop lied and said that I ran away from him. I got 6 months in jail for that. So they were just framing me.
Huh.
Just framing me.
That's
Nothing
crazy.
but framing me.
Wow.
Yeah. Even though the guy with me testified that nobody even talked to us, nobody said a word to us, and we never ran away from nobody. But anyway.
It didn't matter that your friend was there and testified on your behalf. That was it.
That was it. The judge just says, I don't care. 6 months. Maxed me out 6 months. And then they gave me 6 months for a housing code. So I sat in jail for they gave me more than a year, but I sat in jail for 365 days. Great. The interesting part is the case that I was in on was a case against Wells Fargo, because I caught them selling promissory notes, and also I caught them crediting an account in which they claimed a promissory note financing, a financing check came from for a mortgage, for example, that the bank never had proof of the source of those funds. So basically, I caught the banker creating funds from thin air, which is a federal offense. So I had the vice president of Wells Fargo in the witness chair, and I was asking him where the funds came from, and he finally admitted that they debited bank liability when the promissory note is deposited. And I asked him, well, where's the offsetting accounting ledger entry? And he said, what do you need to know that for? So I asked him like 3 times, and he didn't want to answer it. And then finally, I basically said he's under oath to answer, and then he answered, and he says, we credited cash. And he started crying. He started crying in the witness chair because he just testified that he credited cash, which is a felony. The bank is not allowed to create funds by bank entries.
Wow.
So anyway, I even told my friend, I go, this is such a big case. I bet they're going to try to pull stuff. So we got down there early, and that's when that cop tried to approach me and arrest me. I told him I got in the bar in front of the judge, so I got in between the bar, even though the judge wasn't in the courtroom, and I just pointed down to the bar, and I said, I'm in court. He looked down at the bar separating us. He says, I'll get you later. But I told my friend, I go, I bet they're going to try to arrest me just to mess up this case for me. That's exactly what they did. They framed me. They threw me in jail for a year.
Did that throw out the case you were pursuing against Wells Fargo? Like, was that banker let go because you were thrown in jail?
I don't understand your question.
The guy you had on the stand where he admitted that they credited cash because they threw you in jail and framed you. Did that discredit your case?
No, I don't think discredited my case, but the judge ruled against me, even though he wouldn't allow one shred of evidence that I offered that day to go into evidence. And of course, how do you appeal the case when you're in jail?
Right.
It's just a kangaroo court. So what we're doing right now is we're bringing these cases back in. We're trying to establish a community court, and we think that we might be able to go against them civilly for not only the city's violation, but possibly even the bank's violation, because that court case cost me at least $1 million. It was a bad deal. It cost me at least $1 million. I was a fairly wealthy guy. But anyway, back to your question, that's how I dived into understanding the law. Now, the biggest principle in law that I've learned is that you have to understand territorial jurisdiction and then contract law.
Mm-hmm.
2 most important things that you can understand, that you need to understand anytime you get involved in any case, any activity, anybody coming after you, or you going after somebody. For example, the Social Security number is a contract. That is a contract.
Can you explain that a little bit for our listeners?
Yeah. If you're American born, which that means that if you're born on the land between Canada and Mexico, you're American born, even though there's North America, South America, but just for general reference, American born. That makes you an American. Now, if you're born on the land between that area and it happens to be federal property, you're temporarily a federal citizen. But that's only while you're on their land. Now, when you leave that land, you become an American then. So
Interesting.
there is a discrepancy there that you can have a birth certificate that will actually say the United States on top of it, and then others will just say like the state of Nebraska. But jurisdiction with the United States, it says born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Most important key in that sentence, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So if you're born on their land and you walk off their land, then you're leaving the jurisdiction thereof, the territorial jurisdiction.
Okay.
You're no longer a resident.
Right. You're not voluntarily submitting yourself to the jurisdiction once you leave.
That's right. So now, okay, that's territorial jurisdiction, and the reason I bring that up is because that's associated with birthright. If you're an immigrant, you will never have birthright. Never. Cannot get it. Cannot get it. As a matter of fact, I read stories where people were born on non-federal land, and they carried them across the street, and they touched their. This is what they wrote. They touched their foot on the soil owned by the United States, so that they could process a birth certificate on that child in the United States. Because every time they process a birth certificate of a child born in the United States versus on purely as an American, there's two classes. You have a free American, and then you have a United States subject citizen.
Right.
Okay.
Like, that's like a 14th Amendment citizen? Is that correct, or does that relate to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a. Yeah, that would be a 14th Amendment because he's born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So that's the 14th Amendment right there. So that person, once they get a birth certificate, there's all kinds of rational viewpoints on that, and the most compelling is that for every birth certificate they have, a person that's still alive, they're allowed to put more money into the circulation of the system by the Federal Reserve System.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to just real quick put this in here because we've talked to a few people on this show, and one of the guys that we've talked to is named Leonard Ulrich. He's a Christian from Canada, from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and he makes Christian films, basically calling out the system. And in his first film, he had this quote, and this is kind of what got me down this path. I'll just read it to you. He said, "The United States was allowed to become the world's biggest debtor nation when it became bankrupt in 1933, eventually along with all other nations, because your birth certificate is a bond. You are pledged as collateral on the debt of your nation. You are traded as a human resource on the stock exchanges of the world, especially in New York, the home to the world's largest stock exchange."
I believe there's some truth to that. I don't think it's true entirely. The United States is not a nation. The United States is a entity.
Right.
A corporation. It's a corporation. It's an entity. It's not a nation. America is the nation. It has people. It has law. It has land. America is a nation. If you're going to call anything a nation, I think America is. Okay, now Americans got up one day and they said, well, we need something to work together to defend our borders. So they created the Articles of Confederation, and they said the name of this confederation is going to be the United States of America. So the United States of America is more of a proper name. That's why you'll see every time the United States of America is recorded in government papers, it's written as a proper name. It's not in capital letters.
Right.
So, yeah, feel free to cut in. I'll try to, so I don't do all the talking. But okay, so you got the United States of America, the Confederacy established. So that's a tool that's been allowed to act on behalf of the people, the American people. Now that Confederacy created another tool called the United States, and that tool is also now that tool, whenever you see it listed, it's going to be in all capital letters. Now, I don't think that's absolute solid way of looking at it, but the main thing to remember is the United States is not the Confederacy. It's something that was created to work in behalf of the Confederacy.
Okay.
That's why it's called, Articles of Confederation was called the Constitution of the United States, and then when they created the United States Constitution, they referred to it as the Constitution for the United States. So it's like a tool for the Confederacy to use. Now, in 1933 and thereabout, the United States got so bankrupt because of the banking system, and it was probably done intentionally. They've been doing this stuff for thousands of years. So they purposely drove the country into bankruptcy, and of course, that's when the Social Security number was introduced, and that's when they started going out. They declared bankruptcy, so they became insolvent. And when you become insolvent, you're allowed to create script. That's where the Federal Reserve comes in. So they're completely allowed to create script and use it in their bankruptcy system, and that has nothing to do with the American people.
Right.
We're not even part of that.
Yeah. So then here's another question. Then you're saying that the United States, that's what they're doing, but the American people are not. So if the United States is at war, are the American people at war?
No, because, for example, a lawyer friend of mine, he graduated top of his class out of Michigan. He got drafted, and he went into the Vietnam draft. And he said when he showed up to get drafted in, these two guys were standing beside him, and they told him to all line up. And they said, take 2 steps forward and raise your right hand, and we'll swear you in. And these two guys beside him would refuse to do that. They kept their hands down, and they backed up all the way to the wall. And he said he watched those two guys get drilled for, I can't remember if he said 2 hours or 4 hours, but they kept threatening him with court-martial and all this stuff. Anyway, my friend, he didn't know better, even though he was a smart legal mind. He went off to the Vietnam War because he raised his hand and he got sworn in. And when he got back home, he investigated those two guys, and he found out that they understood that swearing in was a contract.
Wow.
They weren't about the contract.
That
so
is
he goes, Mike, yeah, he goes, you mean I went off and I almost got killed a number of times, and I didn't have to do it? He was really ticked. So.
Wow.
Okay, so that's a contract. Now, if it wasn't necessary, why would they have you do it?
Right.
Okay? Why would they have you do it? And why would they get it on film? And blah, blah, blah. Now, the same thing is, if let's say you're an immigrant. So that's a contract, right?
Sure.
So if you're an immigrant, you come in here and they draft you, and you say, I'm not going. They have their own laws. They could throw you in jail, and they can certainly deport you. So you're going to be treated as though you're under a contract. You're not protected by constitutional parameters, pre-14th Amendment constitutional parameters. You're strictly under contract. Now, there's lots of ways to get into contract with the United States. Social Security number, walking in and asking for a driver's license, walking in and asking for being a corporation, marriage licenses, all this stuff.
Right.
The list is endless. The most important thing to remember about all this is the contractual relationship.
Right.
So, now you asked about an American. Okay, the American has no relationship with the United States. No relationship. He does have a limited relationship with the United States of America. Okay? He does have a limited relationship with the United States of America. And the Bible says that even when a nation goes to war, you're not supposed to force people to go to war.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Every time Israel went to war and they had a good king and so forth, the people were asked to come forward. They weren't forced. And we held the same principles in America. So if we ever do have a legitimate war, that has to be supported individually by each American man. He cannot be forced to join the military. But that's not true for the 14th Amendment citizen. He can be forced under contract.
Right. So, okay. And so now we're talking about, you said contracts, like the law of the contract, right? I don't know if we were going to expound on.
Yeah, let's define contract. Okay. The U.S. Constitution says there's no slavery in America, right?
Right.
There's no slavery in America. There's also no slavery in the United States.
But there's voluntary servitude, right?
But there's voluntary servitude.
Is that in the 14th Amendment? I think it is, or it might be. It might not be. I'm not sure.
No, it doesn't mention voluntary servitude, but you will see the word voluntary a lot when the IRS talks about seeking benefits, services, privileges from the United States.
Okay.
None of them are forced on you. Like I said, even the most extreme one of going to the Vietnam War isn't even forced upon you. You had to contract into it.
Right. That's crazy. That's an amazing story, by the way. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Okay, so with a contract, as you're defining contracts, I don't know if you've gotten as far as to define that.
Well, a contract is an agreement. The scripture, even if you don't believe in the scriptures at all, they still apply to earth, people on earth, and even in heaven. So when God says you make a deal, you're supposed to honor it, unless it's a violation of God's law. And there's even some times when it's a violation of God's law, and God still says, "Hey, do it anyway." But America Foundations of Law allows its people to contract as long as it doesn't violate God's law. It's a binding contract. So a contract is simply an agreement between parties. Now, the agreement is only valid if there's full disclosure and if it's conscionable. I can't do anything that's unconscionable. A jury of 12 people can step forward and say, "Hey, that was really unconscionable. We're not going to enforce that contract." Now, I can say it's unconscionable, and the jury might step forward and say, "No, you knew what you were doing. We're going to enforce it." So contract is basically an agreement between people. And the Constitution is not allowed, other people are not allowed, including the United States, to interfere with the right to contract.
Mm-hmm. And so that goes, when you say contract and it's an agreement, that goes for verbal and nonverbal?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I came at this from like the music background, and at one point in time there was this guy who wanted to manage me, and he was trying to hold me under verbal contract that we had an agreement for something, and I just thought that was interesting to tie in with this.
Sure. You still have to prove the contract, and a verbal contract is much harder to prove than a written one, but they're both binding in God's law, and if they're binding in God's law, they're supposed to be binding in all courts in the world.
Mm-hmm. So I guess what I don't want to, we'll try to keep this, in segments here. What do you do to figure all this out? I guess, I mean, it's such a complex thing, but what do you do? Where's the recourse and remedy in all of this for someone like just your average person, or I guess I shouldn't say person, but people like Daniel and I, who are dads, and we're finding out about this stuff, and we've just had our wives have just given birth to our children, who all have birth certificates, and we're trying to think about the family, and we haven't vaccinated them, and we think about all these different things that the state tries to force on, and at some point they'll probably try to force vaccines too. So how do you relieve yourself, or how is there any sort of remedy or recourse for that?
The most important principle to remember is keep the burden of the proof of the contract and the proof of the application of the law territorially upon the moving party. So let's just talk about the birth certificate. Okay, the birth certificate is somebody stepped forward and says, "Hey, I want a benefit, I want a service," and they go, "Yeah, we offer it. Just fill out this birth certificate, and your child will be considered a ward of the state, in a sense."
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so see, there's a contract. You stepped forward, you moved in their direction, and now I believe that a jury of 12 is going to say that's unconscionable because you didn't know what you were getting into. You didn't know you were waiving the child's rights.
Right. They just stamped your feet on there. So
yeah. So there's a prime example of an unconscionable contract that a jury would probably agree with you. Say,
okay.
"Hey, no way, we didn't agree to giving our children away." But there are people in society that are far better off with the United States being a ward of the United States. They're far better off. Now the sad part is that when you don't want to be a ward of the state, they have many ways of punishing you. They make it difficult for you to get a job. They make it difficult for you to get a bank account. They discredit you in every way. But as far as the birth certificate, I'll tell you a little bit of a story. I can't remember which state, but it was in a southern state where I think it was the Mormons or somebody had about 250 children in a school. And they got allegations of child abuse, so the feds, either the feds or the sheriff, probably together, they went down and they confiscated all the kids. And have you heard of that story?
I have not. No.
Probably 5 years ago or something.
Okay.
But anyway, they grabbed all 250 children, and I'm pretty sure it was a Mormon group. I consider it a non-Christian group, but they grabbed him and they contacted my friend up here, the same guy that raised his hand to go into the Vietnam War. Okay, a very sharp lawyer.
Okay.
He refused to get his attorney's license. He refused because when he came back home, he studied it up and he found out that it was a unholy alliance to get that license.
Right.
So anyway, he found out about it. And he called down there and he got a hold of some of the head people, and he said to get a document together that you're going to put an affidavit together by all the parents and say there's no Social Security number associated with these kids and no birth certificate associated with these kids. Almost none of those kids had a Social Security number or a birth certificate. And as soon as that hit the court, the next day they let them go.
Wow.
They let them go.
Wow.
They let them go. Nobody in America could figure out why those kids were let go all of a sudden. They just said, well, we decided to let them go. But we know because we put a document together, we put the burden of proof on the government to prove up evidence that they were actually a ward of the state and that they could come against them in that fashion. So there's a prime example. Now, if they were a ward of the state, then the state could put you through an ordeal. You could take them out of the ward of the state at any moment, I believe. I'm not for sure. At least you could take yourself out of the ward of the state. But anyway, they would, if they were a ward of the state, they would be the parents and everybody involved would be subject to the congressional and legislative laws. But if you're not a ward of the state, then you're subject to common law. And they knew that they would have a terrible time under common law because they couldn't hardly prove any actual damage.
Right. And on that note, can we talk a little bit about common law? Like, what is common law exactly? I mean, I know it's pre-code law. Or, sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
I have a question for you real quick, Paul.
Yeah.
You said that your friend did not get his attorney license, correct?
That's correct.
And you never went to school for law, you just studied it yourself.
That's correct.
Okay. So could you explain for us and our listeners how you and your friend are able to operate in the court system? Because I believe a lot of people are under the impression, unless you're representing yourself, you have to have an attorney to represent you in a court of law or to act in the court system.
Or that's part of the bar association, correct?
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, you're called
I
a legal
believe,
layman, correct?
Ask that question again.
You're called a legal layman, right?
Well, I've never used that. I don't have to call myself anything. That's where
Right.
we want to keep the burden of proof on them.
Right. Okay.
What am I doing that's a regulatable activity? And they'll say, well, you're acting as an attorney. Then even the Supreme Court of Nebraska tried to come after me, and I don't even bother. I don't even bother to go to court. I just put an affidavit in there, and I say, please produce evidence that I did something that was within the jurisdiction of the United States. And I didn't change one period or change my answering machine title or nothing about being a lawyer. But anyway, the Constitution does apply to the American, right?
Right.
Until you get to the 14th Amendment. Okay, then it starts applying to different entities other than an additional entity. Okay, but we don't have to worry about that because we're gonna mainly talk about the position of the American. I don't like to call myself a national. I don't like to call myself. I used to call myself a free inhabitant pursuant to the Articles of Confederation. But why should I name myself that they choose to do within their jurisdiction? I don't think a free inhabitant's a problem, but I don't really want to associate with any of their written documents.
Right.
Gotcha.
I just claim I'm putting together a document. It's called the Affidavit of Sovereignty, and you just file it with the court clerk, and you get a certified copy of it so that you can prove that this thing was created at a certain date, and then you have copies of that, notary created copies of that, which are free. You can hand to anybody from the state that tries to treat you as a subject to the written laws.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. As long as you stay off their land. Now, of course, we know they try to get you for practicing law without a license. Okay.
Right.
Practicing law without a license is a statutory, it's a legislative law. It's written law. And it does apply. It is a valid law. It does apply. But where does it apply, and to whom does it apply to? The U.S. Constitution, when it talks about you have a right to counsel, okay, that's referring to an American. A U.S. citizen does not have right to counsel. They don't have rights. They don't have any rights of the U.S. Constitution. Believe it or not, they don't have any rights. They only have privileges and benefits. No rights. But the American still has those rights, and it says that you have a right to counsel. It doesn't say you have a right to an attorney. You don't have a right to somebody that's licensed by the state. Now, what they do is when you're in their court system, when you walk into a U.S. court system, you are presumed, sadly enough, you are presumed to be a U.S. citizen because you're walking into a U.S. court.
Right. Okay.
Just the fact that you're walking into a U.S. court, they're assuming you're a U.S. citizen.
And by walking into that court, is that where you're passing the bar, or are you just stepping into the courthouse?
No, you're just interacting with them.
Okay.
I'm not talking about territorial. I'm just talking about you're interacting with them. Because the first thing, if let's say somebody from Germany walked up to you and said, "You got to show up in court," and you would just look at them and you'd say, well, "Where in the world do you get your jurisdiction?" And that's what Americans should do with any actions of the U.S. courts. We should immediately put in a demur or a plea in abatement that challenges both territorial jurisdiction and personal jurisdiction. That's where your affidavit of sovereignty would come in. And you put the burden of proof on them to prove that you are subject to that court. Now, when I went in, after I started learning how to win, one of the main things I did to cause them to stop coming after me, because they were stinging me like every month, it was horrible, is I finally went in and I started challenging personal jurisdiction. And this is how it went. The court started, and I just told the judge that I'm challenging personal jurisdiction. And I told the judge, and I said, "Judge, now you have to turn to the plaintiff and have them produce evidence of personal jurisdiction over me." And the judge turned to the plaintiff, county prosecutor. She said, "What do you have to produce as evidence of personal jurisdiction over Mr. Hansen?" So the prosecutor puts me in the witness stand, and he asked me 20 questions, I think, pretty darn close to 20 questions, and they referred to everything under the sky that the state acts with. He asked me, did I have a birth certificate? Did I have a driver's license? Was I a citizen of the United States? Was I a citizen of the state of Nebraska? Did I reside in the city? Did I reside in the state? Did I reside in the United States? Did I have a Social Security number? I mean, he just touched every area that you could possibly think of. And to every question he asked me, I said, "Not that I'm aware of." And he literally started crying. He was so mad. He started crying.
Wow.
Not like a baby. He was just mad. His tears were coming out of his eyes. He was just turning red. And when he got done asking me those 20 questions, the judge just simply turned to him and said, "Mr. Prosecutor, you haven't produced any evidence of personal jurisdiction over Mr. Hansen."
Wow.
And the courtroom was just staring. The courtroom was full of people waiting for to get ushered through, and they were just staring at me like, "What is going on here? Like, wow, what is going on here?"
That must have felt pretty good the first time you won, huh?
Oh, I never won because the prosecutor says I need a break, and so the judge says I'll give you 15 minutes. So the prosecutor comes back and says, "Hey, Judge, you can't rule on this. The prior judge already denied this motion." And then she opens the file and she looks in there. She goes, "Oh, you're right. Okay, next." So they railroaded me. Now you know how the former judge handled my exact same motion for personal jurisdiction? He just said denied. He just said denied. Okay, it's just a racket. It's just an absolute racket. I hope to go back and sue these guys for this because they're not allowed to do this. Now, one of the most important premises of getting sucked into their system is this is what I do. For example, if I'm driving a car with no license, no plates, for no registration, now we're like at 14 for 14. 14 complete wins. No license, no registration, no insurance. And this is how we do it. We have a plate on the car that says no, not for hire. It says you can get on my website and look at the plates that we use.
Yeah.
Not for hire, personal property, household good, and I think we got another thing on the plate. But I personally have had like 11 cops and state patrollers follow me, and just to swerve around my car and down the interstate. And some of them have followed me up to 120 miles an hour trying to catch me and read that plate for another quarter mile, and they just turn around.
Wow.
So
But anyway,
they know.
Oh well, the internet's starting to teach a lot of these cops that there's something to do to this not for hire.
Oh,
If you
okay.
go to the Nebraska statutes, which is going to be the same in every state, the first statute in Nebraska that brought in the motor vehicle code says right in it, this is for vehicles offered to the public for hire. It says it right in there. Now, what I do is we take a certified copy of that and we put it right into the record and give the court judicial notice on it. Last time I started to do that, I sent it to the court one day before they told me to show up. Next day, if I didn't have a license, I was going to go to jail. So I faxed him a 20-page brief on this. Basically told him what I was going to be putting into the record the next day. I walked into the courtroom. The judge put his hand out. He says, "Don't say one word, Mr. Hansen, not one word. I'm done with you. Get out of here." He wouldn't even allow me to walk into the courtroom and put that stuff in as a judicial notice. He didn't want that.
He didn't want people to hear it.
Well, once he's given notice of the law, anybody can come in and say, "Hey, you were noticed back here in 2014 about the truth of the law. How come you haven't been following it? You've been noticed of it."
Okay.
So he was scared. Where's this going to go? Let's get this guy out of here. This is bad. Okay, but this is what I would do if I was driving down the road with no plates, and which I've been doing since close to 2009. Okay, I get pulled over. The cop, they ask for driver's license, registration, insurance. Just first thing you say to the officer, do you have any evidence of a for-hire activity here? And most of the time they'll look at you in a blank stare. And I'm getting popular enough in town to where when they pull me over, they ask me who I am, and I just say Paul Hansen, and they just say, "Have a nice day, Mr. Hansen." They just walk away. And I live in a community of 1 million people, and when I go to the courthouse, it's weird. The sheriffs will walk up to me and say, "You know who resigned because of your challenges you're putting into court?" The head prosecutor. He's been here 19 years, and he resigned. And the next head prosecutor, we know you're going after him. He resigned too. I mean, these are the sheriffs walking up to me. I didn't even know these guys resigned. They're walking up to me and telling me that, the news down here is they're resigning because of you. All because of you. And we went after a guy in California. He resigned too when we went after him. And I talked to some of the friends of this guy that was the head prosecutor. He resigned on a pension of $125,000 a year. He told me, he said, "Who resigns at 19 years? When have you ever heard of somebody in good health resigning at 19 years?" So anyway, okay, so the officer's asking for the license, registration, insurance, driver's license. And let's say he ignores the question about, and I always tell the officer to speak loud because it's being recorded and stored on my cloud. So they're just like looking at you like, "Well, what's this guy up to?" And then when they ask me for those three things, I just say, "Is this activity, could it lead into a criminal, can I get jail time for any possible thing that you're investigating here?" And the officer goes, "Yeah, possibly." He says, "Well, I have rights not to, Fifth Amendment says I don't have to incriminate myself. I don't want to give you anything that could be used against me in a court of law." So anyway, so they're looking at you. So that puts you, now I cover up the VIN number on the car. So they can't even run the VIN on the car. So they go, "Well, I want to see the VIN number." I said, "Do you have a warrant? Do you have a warrant? Do you have probable cause? Is there any evidence that I'm in a regulatable activity?" See, that's when you can hand them this affidavit of sovereignty. I said, take this affidavit of sovereignty and take it back to and fax it into your supervisor. He should know this. And once you hand them a driver's license, you're giving them evidence that you're a regulatable entity. You're a United States citizen. You cannot get a driver's license in any 50 states, at least in the past. Now they changed it now in some states, without being a United States citizen. Or at least a Social Security number, what I should say. Now these new immigrants are coming in, and they're actually getting driver's license without having a Social Security number. But they're passing some other kind of form of document to them. It says that they're signing a document. I assume that they're a resident in the United States. So that's the same as a U.S. subject. Any resident is the same as a U.S. subject. So you can get nailed on that term too. But anyway, the main thing is that and here's a perfect example. One of the people that got stopped, and he didn't want to show the driver's license because even though he had one, he didn't want to show it because he kept asking the officer for regulatable activity. So they called that back up. Sheriff walked up to him and says, "Hey, Charlie, come on. Just flash your driver's license. We'll let you go home. We've been here a half an hour. Come on. Don't you want to go home?" The guy says, "I just flash it and I can go home?" "Yeah."
Oh,
Sheriff
boy.
goes, "Yeah." So he flashes it, and they reach through the window and drug him right through the window.
Wow.
He just told him. He just told him that I'm a regulatable activity. See, if you do have a driver's license with you, which one of the guys I work with has won 7 of these tickets, never paid a fine. He has a driver's license and he does have plates on his car, and he still wins the cases because he's very good at law, and he says that they cannot run your VIN number or your the most important thing is your driver's license number without a probable cause, because that's a search.
Mm-hmm.
They can't search the records without probable cause. So he just basically wins the case. He just wears them down by they don't produce any probable cause. Now another thing you do is, okay, in that same scenario, you don't give the cop those 3 things. Take the 5th. And he says, "Well, I got to arrest you if you don't want to cooperate here." And you say, "Well, I don't agree to no detention or arrest." So then he arrests you, and immediately when you get down to the office, you keep when they're arresting you, you say, "Well, the first thing I want to see is a verified complaint. I want to see the arresting officer fill out a sworn complaint of my alleged violation, because on that complaint it has to say that it took place within the territorial jurisdiction of the written law, and it has to be applied to a proper person that's defined in the law, and it has to attach to a specific activity with location, activity, type of person." He has to swear to that. Now, once he swears to it and puts it into the public record, he's commercially liable. He don't want to do that. I had a judge email, and he says, "We used to do that, but they don't want to do that anymore. They'll do it on a felony, but they won't do it on tickets anymore. They won't do it." So anyway, I was in jail for I think 3 days once, and I kept demanding the verified complaint, and boom, they just let me out. Now remember, they had me in jail for 3 days, and they just let me out, dismiss the charges. No, they never do that. That's the last thing they want to do, right?
Right.
That's the last thing they want to do, because boy, I got damages.
Mm-hmm.
So we've never found a verified complaint. Now, if you're in an area that you're on land where the written code applies, driver's license applies, and that you're a regulatable person, and that you're doing a regulatable activity, they'll probably put the paperwork together to properly prosecute you, verified complaint. But that's not going to happen if you don't fulfill all 3 of those areas.
Right.
Now, and then another thing that chases them away is that we threaten to sue them for lack of promulgation of the law, because the law does not distinguish between a for-hire activity and a not-for-hire activity. The legislature does, but the statutes don't. Now, the statutes are not law; they're just assumed to be law until otherwise rebutted.
Yeah. So policies, code, statutes aren't law.
They are not law. Nope. they're supposed to represent an accurate description of law, but they are not law. A judge never give a judge judicial notice of a statute or a code. You have to give them judicial notice of the legislative law.
Mm-hmm.
The judge even told me that. He says, Mr. Hansen, I'm going to tell you a little secret. I only really have to take judicial notice of law, and it's got to be a certified copy of it.
Wow.
So that's true, absolute notice to the judge. Now, once he's noticed of that, then he's commercially liable in his own personal capacity if he violates it. Now, he's not liable until he's given notice on the record. He doesn't have to know one single law to be liable until he is judicially noticed by a motion of judicial notice of written law, legislative written law.
Is that where you address him by saying on your honor or something like that?
Upon your oath of office?
Yeah, that's it. No, don't go into any of that, because the only thing that stings these guys is a proper judicial notice of the written law.
Okay.
See, the term Constitution, each law constitutes specific elements. Territory, the person, the activity. Even the U.S. Constitution and the Articles of Confederation, Declaration of Independence, Northwest Ordinance, all four of those are actually constitutions. And the U.S. Code says every one of them is a constitution, all four of those. And they constitute three things. They constitute people, land, and law. Very important to understand.
Okay.
Paul, you've mentioned several times the affidavit of sovereignty. Now, when you file that with the court clerk, is that like absolving you of any connection to your birth certificate and your social security number, or what is exactly that affidavit doing?
Yes, that's what it does. It puts the burden of proof on them to prove otherwise, that you're not
okay.
sovereign.
So even though I was issued a social security card and a birth certificate, when I file that affidavit of sovereignty, I've basically disavowed them. They no longer have anything to do with me.
Yep, because if they ask you, they have to ask you in the witness stand that if you're using a social security number.
Oh, okay. So it doesn't matter that one was issued, it's am I using it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Because if let's say for example they give you a fishing license, it means nothing until you try to use it. It means nothing until you try to use it. Now, a birth certificate, I don't understand all the aspects of a birth certificate, but that's more, and I don't understand it all, and it's not important. It never does come into play. Even though that prosecutor brought up the birth certificate, now if I claim the birth certificate as evidence of my relationship to the United States, they'll probably use it against me.
Right.
Because the relationship.
Right.
If I don't do that. Yeah. Now the Social Security number, that's the only person is supposed to have a. And don't worry about using the word person unless you're actually in a court setting. You can use person. Just define it the way you want to.
Okay.
Yeah, the only people that are supposed to have a Social Security number are those that are within the trust relationship that the U.S. system has established to deal with the bankruptcy and the people in the bankruptcy. They're the only ones that are supposed to have that number. Nobody else.
Okay. Something that you did mention, when you get pulled over, you'd say, your name, which is Paul Hansen.
Yeah.
And because that name would appear on like those licenses or issued things that you'd voluntarily contracted with.
It's not. Let me jump in here real quick.
Yeah.
There's 13 Paul Hansens in Omaha, and there's several Paul John Hansens. The name is worthless to them. Absolutely worthless.
Unless you were to produce the license and show it to them, then that ties you to them.
Yep. Or let's say I would say I'm Paul Hansen. Let's say I don't even say Paul John Hansen. So they draw on a search. They say, well, we got 20 Paul Hansens here. What's your resident address? And then I go, 1548, blah, blah, blah. And then they go, oh, I just told them that I was a resident.
Oh, right.
If you go into the United States Code, the term resident means a U.S. subject. What the word resident means in the U.S. Code.
Res.
Don't want to do that. Don't want to do that. Don't ever want to say that you're residing anywhere. It has none of their business. It's none of their business. A free sovereign doesn't reside anywhere.
Right. So would you plead the fifth when they ask that, just to saying the Fifth Amendment says I don't have to produce any evidence that would incriminate me?
Well, if they ask me, what's your resident address, I'd say, do you have any evidence that I'm a resident? That's the most beautiful thing that you can say out of your mouth when you're talking to these guys. You don't say that you're not a resident. Don't say that. You say, do you have any evidence that I'm a resident? You don't say that you're not a U.S. citizen. You say, do you have any evidence that I'm a U.S. citizen?
Right.
So as you've been saying, the burden of proof is on them. I don't have to prove that I'm not. Can you prove that I am?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of like a really intense game.
Well, anytime you're in court, you want to think for several minutes before you say anything. And if you don't know what to say, you say, I need counsel before I answer that question.
Okay.
And that's how I come in to these court settings. I'm there for counsel. They can turn right around and whisper a question into me in my ear, and then I can whisper it back to them. And they cannot be denied that. They have to have their right to counsel.
That's so cool.
Unless there's evidence on the record and they haven't rebutted any of it that you're a U.S. citizen. See, if you come in as a defendant, if you look into state statutes, it says a defendant is a U.S. subject.
Right.
They're tying you in every single way they could possibly do it.
And
so
they
just know. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and it's like a summons is a voluntary thing. It's like an invitation.
Well, not necessarily. If it's a common law situation, you have to come in, but that doesn't mean you have to continue in their court. It means that if you come into let's say I actually stole your lawnmower and you went to the court and you got them to come after me. Okay, the first thing I would do is I would make sure that I wasn't being prosecuted under statute, that I would be prosecuting under common law.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Explain that. That's actually something I really want to hear about.
So the prosecutor is going to look at you cross-eyed because he's going to say, "Oh, the United States doesn't deal with common law." That's true. The United States doesn't deal with common law. The United States deals with written law.
Right.
Like the legislatures make the law. Okay, but see, you're dealing with an American here that's being accused of stealing a lawnmower that's not on government property. Now, if I stole a lawnmower off a military base, you better bet I'm going to be subject to the military base court.
Right.
See, I didn't. There's no evidence that I stole. That's one of my questions. Is there any evidence that I stole a lawnmower that's property or possession of the United States or the activity of the land that it took place on? Because, property can also include a lawnmower of the United States. You got to be careful. It doesn't always associate with just land.
Okay.
Or buildings, because it says possession or a territory of the United States. So you can have possessions that are movable. Cars a possession. Okay, so you got to be careful with some of that stuff. But even if they do say it's their car, you still say, well, the activity never took place on your territorial jurisdiction, so I want a common law court setting. Now, a common law court, there's a guy in California that was no license, no registration insurance, and they come after him, and he put in a good brief. He says, I want a common law court because I'm not a state citizen. I'm not a U.S. citizen. So the judge goes, oh, yeah, we can give you a common law court. And the prosecutor stood up and said, sir, that means there can't be any U.S. citizens on the jury. The judge goes, oh, prosecutor, let's have a meeting in my office. And 15 minutes later, they walked out and dismissed the case because they don't want anybody to know that an American has a right to a jury that is not a U.S. citizen.
Wow.
Okay. So I guess expounding on that, so that's common law. So you said that people or citizens of the United States past the 14th Amendment, whatever you want to say, they don't have rights. They have privileges that are granted to them by this corporation. Now, what does that have to do? And I don't, if you can interrupt me here if I'm going too far, but what does that have to do, or does it have anything to do with the Uniform Commercial Code?
I don't know. I'd stay away from the Uniform Commercial Code because it appears to me like it has its own jurisdiction territorially.
Okay.
I don't think there's no, to me, there's no reason to use it. There's no reason to use it because in common law, It's God's law.
Mm-hmm.
That's what common law is. It's God's law. Now remember, God's law says keep your word. So God's law does include voluntary servitude. God's law does not include involuntary servitude.
Right.
Except for criminals and pagans that blatantly violate his laws.
Mm-hmm.
So
You're talking about let your yes be yes and your no be no.
Yeah, very much so. So anyway, so when we're talking about common law here, man does not make law. He only finds it. He only finds it. It's God's law. It's God's standards. We just find his standards and we apply them. If I'm going to mow your yard, we apply God's laws to it. Every aspect of it, the payment, the doing of it, making sure I don't get hurt while I'm mowing your yard, everything. God's laws applies to everything. And the jury, godly men can sit back if something happens, and the jury, they're not to apply their own created law. They're supposed to apply God's law. Right. There's only one constitution of the world, God's creation, and that's God's written word. That's the constitution of the world. It trumps all other constitutions, and they'll admit to this. The United States system will admit to that. That's why. Wow. That's why they leave the Americans. That's why they leave Americans alone.
When you say that God's word, is it any specific? For instance, is it like the authorized version? So is it like the King James version of the Bible, or is it just God's word, as it is?
Well, God's word does not represent. God's word is not written word. God's word is truth. His rightness is His mind. If you're on a jury, you take a vow to do your best to apply God's will to that situation.
Right.
You're under a curse if you don't.
Right, but
you're under curse.
But we're us three talking right now. We are believers of Jesus Christ, and that's what we believe. But some people on that jury don't necessarily believe in Jesus Christ and don't necessarily have that same belief in that same God, which again, that would be Satan. Our belief system. So how does that work?
A person that doesn't believe in God they're insane. They don't qualify for jury duty. The person that follows any other god other than the ones that is described in the scriptures, he's insane. He doesn't qualify.
Right.
So they're not going to agree with this. I mean, you can't get an insane person to commit himself. He's just not going to do it. So that's where a godly nation just has to stand up. And with proper application of bringing forth the principles of Scripture, even the pagan will agree with you most often.
Oh yeah. Most definitely. If you talk with an unbeliever and you can quote the scripture, but then explain it to them, and they'll be like, "Well, yeah, I agree with that," and they'll go along with you. But a lot of people hear, "Oh, the Bible, a bunch of rules." Well, I don't care. I'm going to do my own thing, and it's not really so much that they don't agree with it; it's that they don't want to submit themselves.
Right. There's lots of reasons why people don't follow the scriptures, but none of them are valid. Not a single one are valid.
Right.
That's why we have the jury of 12. The jury of 12 just basically started with the 12 disciples, very much the head of the church.
Could it go back further than that for the 12 tribes?
Oh, yeah. I never thought about that. But yeah, you're right. Generally, you're going to get 7 people that are going to actually make the right decision in the midst of 12, especially if you're somewhat careful about selecting the people. The United States is scared to death of a godly jury. They're scared to death of it.
Is that why I had been summoned for jury duty a few months ago, and I had actually moved out of the county, so I didn't qualify to do it or whatever. But I had been told just to walk in there and say I'm a Christian, and they would never ever select me for that jury. Is that true?
It might be true. And basically, what I would do is I ask them, well, what are you relying upon that? See, they call it jury duty. It doesn't say you have a jury right. It's called jury duty. You just go in and ask them, well, what do you rely upon that I have a duty? And they're going to say, well, you're a registered voter. Then you say, well, what evidence you have I'm a registered voter? And they'll bring out the papers. And you just put in an affidavit that says that you didn't aware you were giving up your sovereignty when you registered as a voter.
Huh.
You're done.
Nice.
Now you could tell them I want to be put on the sovereign's list of jury duty. I'm not a U.S. citizen. I want to be available for any sovereign that comes in here and needs a jury.
Right, for a common law jury.
Yeah, they're going to chase you out of there as fast as you can. They don't want nobody to know that. And that's what we're doing with this community court. I'm going to send you guys a PowerPoint that explains the duty that a Christian has to be part of a community court. Very compelling.
Awesome.
Here's a little story. Let's say you walk into a court.
Yeah.
And the judge is just getting done with the case. The plaintiff put 50 million babies in the courtroom. If all these babies have been killed, and the judge just rules, Constitution doesn't protect these babies. Clear the courtroom. I rule against the plaintiff. I rule in favor of the defendant, the United States. He says, well, the United States Constitution doesn't provide any protection for these babies. Okay, next. So he's wiping the blood off his desk, and he goes, next case, and you walk up there and you look him in the eye, and he says, sir, what justice can I give to you? As a Christian, you're going to look back at him, and you're not even going to want to say anything, right? Justice? What justice can I expect from this court?
Right.
You go looking for a different court. You don't need any other evidence than that.
Right.
No other evidence is necessary. That's all you need. 50 dead babies, that's enough evidence. That's 50 million times more evidence than I need. You guys condone this.
Yeah.
So you can walk out the door and you can say, you can call the community, Christian community, come together. Let's do our duty and have a just court available for us. So this is what this PowerPoint explains, and it explains that the jury has no chance at all of ever being prosecuted by the United States if they do this properly. No chance.
Wow.
The jury only makes a determination based on the scriptures. That's all they're doing. The jury is just simply asked, is 2 + 2 4? The jury goes, yes. One at a time, they go, yes, I agree with that. My determination is 2 + 2 is 4. The United States can never go after these guys and prosecute them.
Paul, would you mind if we put that PowerPoint up in the show notes for this episode on our website for our listeners to download?
Oh, sure. Well, I don't know. I got to think about that. We got to be careful. I probably will, but we don't want to open this up for unbelievers that want to intrude and decimate our purity of a jury pool.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely. What you said in that little story that you just gave us about the babies in the court, just to kind of tie that in with something. Obviously, we know that Roe v. Wade, with that whole case, that was a big deciding factor in the abortions and babies and whatnot. Now, when we talk about person, the word person, you can't. I guess I'm trying to understand this right, but those babies in Roe v. Wade, when it says that, like, what is it, Daniel? Like, a baby is not a person. You know what I mean? Or sorry, not a baby,
an unborn child. This is what we found in our research. They will say, well, that is not a person in the court system, because they're defining person as a corporate fiction, I think,
or a corporation,
a tradable entity, I think, is what it comes down to, because they haven't gone through the live birth, so they don't have a birth certificate, so they're not tradable.
Right. They don't. The United States is a complete business relationship. They don't deal with any living beings, so it's complete business. When they lose a life on the battlefield, it's not labeled as a death. It's labeled as a collateral loss.
A financial loss.
Collateral loss. Financial loss. They've lost some of their inventory.
Wow.
Evil. It's satanic, and they should be run out of town on their ear. And many of them should be hung for violation of God's law in the biggest degree. The community court could actually do this, because if we push the United States to the territorial land that they can only govern themselves on, do it to the Articles of Confederation, U.S. Constitution, that they would be looked upon as an extremely manageable entity, because people would realize, like, oh my goodness, they are small. But we let them. See, Nebraska is 1.4% considered land that is governable by the United States written law. All the rest of the land is under common law. Nobody knows it.
Huh.
So we're supposed to push that written law onto that 1.4%. Connecticut is 0.4%. California is 34%. Nevada is 84%. We're supposed to push that federal government onto their own land and tell them to stay there and quit bothering the Americans. But
Wow.
they keep coming out. They keep coming out and touching the Americans is because the Americans got Social Security numbers.
But they don't have a clue what's going on. So
Don't have a clue what's going on.
Now, Paul, you said you were working on a affidavit of sovereignty, like something that you're going to publish on your website that we could have access to.
Yeah. I sell it for just $5 because the reason I sell it for $5 is because the people that take this document and use it, they have perpetual access to this Dropbox that will tell of stories of people using it, of minor adjustments to it, successes and difficulties that they come across, in the operation of it. So for $5, that is like a wonderful deal.
Okay, so what you're really paying for is the wealth of experience and foreknowledge.
Yeah, the application of it, because every time you start using that document, you can get on this website and say, well, what are other people doing? What other obstacles? Are we getting good responses? Or is this a waste of time? We don't have to, each person doesn't have to just go in there guessing. They're going to have hundreds of examples of where people are using the same document or the same standing. It's just I'm not going to do it for less than $5 because I'm not going to take my time to set up the Dropbox and send it to them. And,
right.
Oh yeah, that seems like a lot, like more than fair.
Yeah, it should be $100, but anyway, I can make a living doing stuff like that. I get thousands of people. When I put good stuff together, it becomes popular, and I sell for $5 a pop usually. I can't sell for any less than that because I got to take time to add those people to Dropbox.
Oh yeah.
Answer a couple emails but anyway, that's what the church should be doing. The church should be doing what I'm doing. They should be establishing a sound resource for dealing with these guys. They don't. Most of them are 501c3s.
Absolutely. You just hit it on the head.
Sam was waiting for you to go there.
Yeah, they've abandoned. They've taken on an unholy alliance. They're holding hands with Satan. A lot of them even know it, and it's terrible. It's terrible.
Right.
Unbelievably terrible.
Paul, could you just quickly explain what the 501c3 status is for our listeners in case they don't understand what that is or even have a clue?
501c3 status is very similar to taking a Social Security number. You've walked away from your sovereignty, and you walked into their office, and you say you want to do business with them. And they go, okay, we'll do business, but we're going to do business under our terms. And their terms are, state is going to govern this entity that you guys are going to create, and you're going to have a church name on it. It's not going to be a Church of Jesus Christ. You're not going to be allowed to use the Bible as the rule of law. You're going to be forced to use legislative standards to regulate that entity, just the same as they use to regulate a lot of other companies that they.
So Jesus is not the creator of this church. It is the state that is the creator of this church.
Yep. And when they have a meeting, Jesus is knocking on the door, wanting to get in, to put his input in, and they say, no thanks.
Yep.
No thanks. We don't need your help. We're doing just fine. It's satanic. It's terrible that these churches will take this ransom and this privileges benefit and sell out their countrymen.
Yeah, Dan has a pretty interesting story. Our friend is very involved in the church that we attend. We are not members of this church. It is a 501c3 church, but we're also searching out a house type of church right now, kind of in place of that. But Dan, go ahead, Dan.
A quick background on me, Paul. I have gone to school for my bachelor's degree in pastoral ministry. I was a pastoral intern for 3 years at a church that was 501c3. I knew nothing about any of this until a little more than a year ago. So this has been a journey for Sam and I. We both came into the realization of all this stuff a year ago and learning all of this. So with that, as we had, our friend told me about we have a food bank at our church, one that the people of the church stock, but also one that the government brings a mobile food truck around. And when we're opening the food bank up that our people stock only, we are allowed to, share the gospel and talk with people. But if it's when the mobile food truck comes along, the people line up in the church that it's basically packed out for getting their food. We are not allowed to speak of the gospel, mention Jesus Christ or the Bible at all, period. And when our friend learned this, he was telling us about it. He was outraged. She's like, well, then what's the point? Why are we doing this? And it just, that was one of the things that, and this is right when we're discovering 501c3 status, and Sam and I are going like, wow, oh my word, they really do control us.
Yep. And if they wanted to shut your doors, they could pass a law and do it. Completely regulated. They'll tell you, go somewhere else. This building's ours. You can back out of that 501c3 because you remember it's voluntary. It's a voluntary agreement. It's a contract. So they can back out of it, but they got to do it properly.
Right. I've watched some seminars on that from Robin Wright, this guy that used to be part of the Lordship Foundation, but I don't know much of where he's at this point either. But that's actually where I've taken a lot of my notes, was from him on that stuff. So
yeah, any church, even a satanic church, can be a 501c3.
Mm-hmm.
But the IRS recognizes a church under a true church that's going to stay independent of the United States system as a 508. The IRS will recognize a 508 church, and there's no registration, no nothing. It's declared as independent from the United States and the regulations of the IRS, and they can't even determine who is allowed to be a member of that 508 classification. They're not even allowed to make that determination. So that's a good deal.
We were talking about you sell for $5 the affidavit and all that. Can we just talk a little bit about documents and why we wouldn't want to use the court's documents and whatnot? I understand that there are laws of the document, and even more so there's like a debtor side to and a creditor side to certain documents and things.
No, I wouldn't agree with that. The number one thing is you got to decide if you want to use their courts or not. If you don't want to use their courts, then every word on there needs to be crucial to keep yourself independent from them. So when somebody comes after you and you don't want to use their courts, most people will fill out a court title as in, for example, our court would be called in the District Court of Douglas County. Okay, in. Okay, you don't want to put that word there, in, because that's a term.
Right.
Well, to. We put the word to. So
okay.
It's just a letterhead. You just convert it to a letterhead, to the District Court of Douglas County. And then you stay away from the word defendant. Never use the word defendant. You don't even have to put nothing under it. You don't have to title yourself. You don't have to ever title yourself. Just don't use the word defendant. Because defendant in the statutory world is a U.S. citizen.
Right.
And then don't ever use a resident address. You can if you're in court and they ask you, is that a zip code that you put on that paper? You say, not that I'm aware of. even if 1,000 people told you that's a zip code, you just say, not that I'm aware of. Then they'll say, well, what is that? Well, that's a series of letters and numbers that the guy in the blue suit that brings my mail tells me to put on my paper if I want it to show up in that box in front of my house.
Right.
But anyway, if you do call it a zip code, and here's a true case that I've read. The judge said, you did not rebut the zip code that you use on all of the filings of your documents in relationship to a federal zone. Therefore, I rule against you. The judge used the zip code on the guy's filing to give territorial jurisdiction. See, that zip code is associated with a federal zone, and you're saying by using that zip code, the judge, somebody will say, do you live at that address? Yeah, I do. You just told the judge that you're a resident of the United States. That's what's before the judge. So I always put everything I want on that letter, and then at the last sentence I say, not a resident address without the United States. I usually just put without the United States.
Huh.
just without the United States. Or you can write down not a resident address. It's when you tell them in court that you're a resident in a federal area, a federal zone. That's when they hook you.
Right, exactly. I had that written down here in my notes to ask you, and you just totally covered it.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Territorial jurisdiction. It's territorial jurisdiction. If they got territorial jurisdiction, it doesn't make if you're an American or not. You did something within their zone.
Right.
You threw a gum wrapper on the floor in their territory. You're subject to their laws.
Mm-hmm.
Too bad. Too bad. You're the one that came into our zone. You're the one that did it. Don't cry now that you don't want to be held to our law. Then you'll say, "Well, I didn't know." Well, our law says you know. Ignorance of the law is not going to be excused here. Our laws are written. They're written in the 50 million words that these books on these shelves that nobody can read.
Mm-hmm.
They don't care. They don't care about justice. They use the law against you. It's evil, but they do that.
Well, their system is all it's all a monetary system, right? I mean, it's all commercial crime or it's commerce, right?
No, there's a lot of commerce involved in it, but a lot of it is control.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a lot of good things with their system. There's a lot of good things in it, but of course we got 50 million dead babies. That's part of the bad part of it.
So, okay, so I think you said you own a business and you deal with like property and stuff, right?
Yeah, I have rental properties. Now the cities come against me, and they've cost me over $1 million just in my rental property side. I probably lost almost $3 million dealing with this legal stuff. So I am not a small fish. For example, in 2000, the IRS said I owed $150,000. I simply sent in a 6203 assessment request. They've never touched me since. Never bothered me since.
Wow.
Remember I told you to keep the burden of proof on them?
Right. Okay. Yep.
That's what a 6203 does. A fool assesses himself, especially an American. When an American assesses himself, he writes his Social Security number on the paper, and then he signs it.
Wow.
That's all they need. They look at that number, and they look at the name. If you just signed it and didn't put a Social Security number on it, they can't even take enough money from you. You have to put that Social Security number on it.
Wow.
All right.
See, that 1040, for example, tax form, that's a contract. We've had IRS agents in the witness stand. You know, this is what the IRS agent said. Mr. IRS agent, what created the liability on the defendant? He assessed himself by signing a 1040 tax form with a Social Security number on it. Well, Mr. IRS agent, if he didn't put a Social Security number on it or sign it, would he have a duty with the IRS? The IRS agent goes, no, none.
Okay, so then you don't want to use the Social Security card like at all. I watched an informational video once. I don't remember who it was by. I think it might have been Kent Hovind or David Sidney, talking about how like you can redeem the Social Security number or
you don't have to redeem it. Social Security number is no different than a driver's license in your pocket. Remember I told you a story? The guy had it in his pocket and it didn't give him no problems.
Yep.
When he pulled it out and showed it, that's when it gave him a problem.
Okay, so then
you can have a Social Security number. It doesn't give you problems, but when you use it, then you got problems.
okay, so you don't want to use it at all, like ever, just period.
Well, if somebody used it to open a bank account, I don't think the government's going to ever use that against you to produce evidence of personal jurisdiction because they don't want anybody to know that. They don't want people to know that. They'll let you walk before that comes into the courtroom.
Right. Gotcha.
Let's say you made $1 million a year, $100 million a year.
Okay.
IRS sends you a letter, says we haven't received your filing this year. You got a deadline. All you have to do is send them a letter back. I have all the forms. It's by notary presentment. I can be the notary. Certified mail. You just request an assessment. So you got proof of a state notary, an independent person, mailing a document to a certain location, verifying by affidavit of exactly what was in that envelope. In that envelope, it's a request for a 6203 assessment that the IRS is required to fill out and send back to you. It's basically a bill. Has to be done under penalties of perjury. It has to be signed in ink. It has to have a Social Security number on it. It has to be sworn to. No IRS agent is going to send an American a verified assessment unless he knows that American has taken on a license or has done business in a federal zone, or he has evidence of for that given year, like a document is been signed like a 1040 tax form, for example. Because the W-2s, the W-4s, 1099s do not create evidence of a tax duty.
Only the 1040.
Well, and 1040 doesn't by itself. It's when you fill it out. For example, we told this guy for years never sign a 1040 because it's a contract. So he listens to Irwin Schiff. Irwin Schiff says, put all zeros on it, put your Social Security number on it, sign it, send it in. They'll leave you alone. That cost him $10,000 in penalty right there, because a zero is a number. A zero is a number. He just put in a false assessment.
Wow. Oh, my word.
Now, what he should have done, he should have said, I never signed that thing. That's what he should have done, because he didn't sign it. Just because your signature, your hand printing on a document doesn't mean you know what you're signing. It doesn't mean you know what you're agreeing to. He didn't know he was agreeing to that. No common law court was ever going to hold his feet to the fire on that.
Right, because it was unconscionable.
It was unconscionable. That's exactly right.
Okay.
But he was so embarrassed he never come back to the meetings anymore. And who knows? Maybe his wife threatened to divorce him. That's pretty common with a lot of this stuff. The wife. No man should ever let a woman dictate where God is leading him, and no woman should ever let a man dictate to her where God is leading her.
Because your first duty is to God.
Yeah, you mentioned Kent Hovind. I'm actually the CEO of Creation Science Evangelism. I don't know if you guys knew that, but
I did not
really
know that.
I discovered you because I've caught up on Kent's blogs. When I was in high school, he got arrested and all that stuff, and I thought, wow, this guy's a schmuck, he broke the law and da 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 da. And then a year ago, when we started learning about this stuff, and Sam actually stumbles across some Kent Hovind again. I go, I remember Kent Hovind. His stuff was great, but he's in prison because he didn't render to Caesar's that which is Caesar's. But then Sam said, yeah, but read the rest of the verse, Dan. And remember, I'm a pastoral student. I'm like, yeah, unto God that which is God's. And I, like you've been saying, God's law is supreme. It is the only law that really matters. And I didn't think about that. But as we looked more into it, we kept discovering, okay, so, and this is really the reason for our title, God's Property Radio, because Sam and I, we are God's property. We're not the state's property. We're not the government's property. We are God's property.
Mm-hmm. Now, the reason Kent lost his case is because he hired an attorney. Kent Hovind gave an attorney $120,000 to defend him. The federal government put on a 3-day case in chief. They got done. The judge turned to Kent's attorney and says, what is your defense? He stood up and says, no defense, sir. He sold Kent out.
Wow.
Absolutely sold him out. We told Kent, I personally talked to Kent. I said, Kent, you hire an attorney, you will lose. We've never seen a person win ever with an attorney. We win all our cases without an attorney.
So you've known Kent for a while.
Yeah, I probably called him back in 2000. How long has he been in jail? He's almost been in jail 8.5 years.
7 or
he actually almost 10 years. He gets out this coming February in 2015.
Yeah, terrible. Now Kent was pressured by family members to hire an attorney.
Oh, I'm sure.
So he was scared of losing his family, relationship with his family. I'm not going to tell you which ones, but he was scared.
No, of course not.
And that's legitimate.
Yeah.
But he should have listened to us, and those family members should have listened to us. They were told also that one guy that did raise his hand to go to the Vietnam War and found out later he shouldn't have.
Yeah.
He came back and studied the law. He beat the IRS 50 times, more than 50 times.
Huh.
Okay, 50 times. completely by keeping the burden of proof on the IRS. He actually said, he'd tell his clients, he said, if you go into the courtroom and you say you're not a U.S. citizen, you're going to lose your case. And they'd look at him like, that's weird. Then he said, if you walk into the courtroom and you say that you are a U.S. citizen, you're going to lose your case. So they look at him like, well, I'm kind of out of luck if I do and out of luck if I don't. And he says, this is what you need to say. Is there any evidence that I'm a U.S. citizen? It's so simple.
Right. You're putting the burden of
It's
proof
so
on them.
simple.
Exactly.
Yep. If you walk into the courtroom and say, I'm not God, the burden of proof is on you. How are you going to prove you're not God?
You're making a statement. You're not asking a question for them to rebut.
Right. Everything that comes out of your mouth in the federal court should have a question mark behind it. Everything.
Right.
And we even had one judge tell one of his clients that if you would have kept your mouth shut, I could have sent you home now. But because you opened your mouth and you said you weren't this and you weren't that, and you weren't this and you weren't that, I got to sentence you now because you couldn't back up your statement.
Wow.
So you don't ever say, they'll say, well, you're a resident. You're a citizen. You were born in the United States. Every single question. You're a Christian. Even if they ask you if you're a Christian, you just say, is there any evidence that I'm a Christian? You don't have to prove anything. Are you a man? Are you alive? Are you breathing? Just get smart with them. Just calmly look at them and say, is there any evidence? That's what I did.
Right.
It stops them cold. They're asking you questions for their benefit, not your benefit, their benefit.
Paul, so you said that you are now involved in CSE?
Yeah.
So
which is pretty much shut down. I mean, it's until Kent gets back out.
Right. That was our question, because Eric, obviously he started Creation Today. I was under the assumption he just absorbed CSE and then created a new ministry, Creation Today. But CSE hasn't been dissolved then. You're the CEO and it's just waiting for Kent to get back out. Wait a second. No, he made Eric the temporal CEO, didn't he? But then something changed?
No. Yeah, he resigned. Eric don't have nothing to do with CSE. He's allowed to sell CSE's material.
Okay.
But that's it. But Ken Hovind has no authority over CSE. CSE is it's a trust that was set up. Kent is only an employer of that trust. So Kent went to jail because he was acting as an employer for CSE.
Wow.
He could have won his case. He could have won his case so easily. Pathetic.
My goodness.
Pathetic.
Well, I do have to say we are looking forward to Kent's release. We pray for him often, and we definitely want to get him on here to interview him somewhat about his experiences in jail time, but also just about the subject of creation.
And not to mention, just for me, Kent Hovind was huge in my walk with the Lord. So
we're probably going to win Kent's case. We're probably going, but when you hire an attorney, it messes the case up so bad that it's so hard to take it back out. But we believe that we can bring it into the proper court under common law, and the opposing United States will not be able to produce evidence that he was subject to what they claim that he wasn't allowed to do. See, he actually would go down to, he didn't want to mess with the IRS. He just wanted to say, get out of my life.
Right.
So he, as an employee, would go down to the bank and he would draw out $9,500 because somebody told him that if you draw out $10,000, your bank has to call IRS and tell them. And we don't want them snooping around here if Kent's mind goes. So Kent did that for like 26 times or something, and then he talked to the guy that I work with. He's a law professional out of Seattle, and the guy says, "Quit that. That looks bad. If they ever bring that in front of a jury, the jury's going to look at you and go, why'd you pull out $9,500 each time?" He says, "You're not doing nothing illegal by pulling out $95,000 or $95. Go just do what you want. Don't set this pattern. It's going to be painted a bad picture someday for you." So he quit doing that right away when he told me. Kent goes, "Oh, I never knew. I never thought about it."
Right. And I remember hearing about that in high school.
Yeah, 4 years later. I mean, this is how evil the federal government is. They actually talked the local forest ranger to signal out Kent not to be able to burn his trash. Now, everybody else in Pensacola can burn their trash in the backyard, but Kent can't. Kent goes, well, okay, I won't burn my trash, so I don't want any hassles with you guys. I can live with that. So he puts his trash out in front of his house, and for years, the IRS was picking up his trash. He didn't even.
Wow.
So now my phone's going to click out here pretty soon, but I don't think they ever did find anything in those papers to prosecute him on. But that's how sneaky these guys are. They basically got a dumb jury of 12 people, and they told him, well, he was going down there and he was pulling out this money to hide it from the IRS, and the jury was just sitting there like, oh, well, we pay our taxes. He ought to pay his taxes, you know. That's
right.
America.
Yeah.
And when his attorney was supposed to defend him, the attorney stands up and says, no defense. And off to jail he went.
Jeez.
Wow.
And evil.
Paul, I want to say thank you to you for coming on and doing this interview.
Yeah.
To wrap up here, I think Sam's got one more question, but after that, would you mind closing us in prayer, and then we'll call it a night after that?
Sure. My phone's blinking several times here. I hope I can finish. So, Father,
okay.
we just really appreciate what you've allowed us to do here tonight, to have a good conversation. We hope it came out well for maybe thousands of people to listen to it, and hope that we can get together and be more thorough on specific points of the fight. And thank you for the opportunity and the spirit that comes from you, that we want to be just and do your will in our lives here. Amen.
Amen. Hey, Paul, again, thank you so much. This has been just probably one of the most enjoyable interviews so far, and just found everything that you had to say just so interesting. And we really appreciate this conversation, Paul. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, we'll be lifelong friends. I'm quite sure of that.
All right, and I'm back, and some of you have heard that before, that broadcast. That was probably my favorite episode that we've done, just because I was heavily drawn into the legal conversation and studies of the legal realm, and it's definitely impacted me as a songwriter, too. I mean, I'm writing about a lot of this stuff in my own music that I'm creating, and so it's a big reason why we're doing what we're doing, is understanding that whole thing with the birth certificate, social security number, marriage certificate, all that stuff. I think that Paul Hansen really, I would say this. I think that Paul at this point probably is more dangerous than Kent, because if Paul gets out, then that will verify that you can live in the world but not of the world. And they do not want to let that guy go, obviously, with all the information that you just heard. If that didn't set well with some of you, then hey, that's cool. I happen to think that Paul is maybe not 100% right on everything, but I don't know. It's hard for me to debate him. I think he makes a lot of sense on a lot of the things that he was talking about. But yeah, Hansification coming on. We all got to get involved. I wanted to just let you guys know that you can still go to freekent.com. You can still get more info on all this stuff if you're just getting, if you're just joining us now for the ride. It's going to keep going until we know what's going on with Paul, until we get just a little bit more, I guess, closure on what's going to happen in the future for those two guys. We also, at freekent.com, we have T-shirts still available. We Demand Home Vindication T-shirts, and you can buy those for $25 within the U.S., or you can, I guess I shouldn't say U.S., but, hey, that's the postal system, I guess, now that you've listened to Paul J. Hansen and talk about the corporate U.S. But anyway, in the USA, you can get one for $25, and in any other country, you can get it for $35. That will include shipping on both of those prices for both of those locations and shipping routes. But, yeah, I just, again, just praise the Lord for all of the support that you guys are giving, Kent, and I know we can help. I feel like God is just plaguing, just beating the drum of come on, let's build this guy's reputation back. Let's help. So everybody that's listening that loves Kent Hovind, loves the Lord, loves what those two gentlemen were standing for. You have a podcast, you have a blog, start writing about it, start talking about it, start just dropping conversations about it to your friends, because, we're talking about these guys' life in prison. We're talking about somebody who's going to get locked away for mailing a letter. I mean, come on. Seriously. Anyway, so many more broadcasts to come on this, and it's definitely not over. And again, just thank you guys so much. If you heard us on iTunes, you've been listening to us, you download from there, please leave us some feedback. Just leave us a little positive review, and just give us a little comment on how God's Property Radio is, edifying you in some way. So until next time, don't buy into what the world is selling.
Welcome to LV Envy, the city that's seldom windy. Summer heat make you think and wonder if hell would even envy. You listening to LV Envy, Yahweh versus the enemy. Gotta stay with the King of Kings who reigns infinitely. Cause I be tripping, going insane when he not with me. Prince of the air be flying by me, bang. He try and get me. His only care is devising new lies to try to trick me. New inventions intending on extending my slavery. New inventions intending on extending my slavery. Like Eli Whitney, big homie told me, Jay, focus on painting pictures. Hey, I'm trying to avoid tripping on broken bottles of liquor. Broken sisters posing as strippers, hoping for riches, open for business. Don't get it twisted, her quote-unquote uncle's pimping. Sun glistens off these replicated monuments, taking patrons to any destination. All of these windows sparkling, the endo sparking, and street symbols compliment the harlots and the worship of these games. Cue the Nintendo cartridges. This gambling's the reason these parents arguing. Addiction's larger than attention given to the kids at the apartment that's starving, and the car's not starting, and that pawn shop's bargain is a long shot. Pardon kids, how you steal your son's Xbox from out of his closet? Relax, you was gonna get it back with that tax return. Either that or that check from that deposit. Woke up at 7-Eleven when the check was 7-Eleven. Then you head to 7-Eleven for the lucky 7-Eleven. Hoping you flip it or you addicted. Who you kidding? You lost it. Welcome to LV Envy, this city's forever windy. Spirit filling this atmosphere and healing this elementary. To that kid that just healed 2 kids back at that elementary. Periodically at that table, follow me, elementary. Carbon copies of Abba's only begotten, chopping proper doctrine up and eating it. Read it and then we watch it like TV up in the 90s on ABC on a Friday. But this is in living color, my brothers, no Keenan Ivory. Our treasures hover above us while others is clean and ivory, but we still love them, no judgment because of the king inside. We tell others the kingdom's rising, redundantly sing the gospel and pray that them others hear and get covered in hemoglobin. Eventually, regardless, the tempter will meet the prophet that entered to leave the coffin. Repentance will be applauding and every knee will be bowing, and every tongue will repeat with no option that he is God. Preaching to Stephen, leaving them smiling with lovely stones. Ezekiel breathing weekly into these lovely bones. Providentially feeding poverty with this Trader Joe's. This is our everyday people slaying the family stone. Simply a rhyme to welcome you to Las Vegas, the place where grace is beyond the new.
I've never played a slot machine. No, I have, but ironically when in Vegas on an Indian reservation in California. Yeah, that's down, but I played a crap table. Hadouken!